Fictional story. For entertainment only. There is a drawing on my refrigerator. A child drew it. 2 adults. One small figure standing between them. When I first saw it, I thought it was sweet. I thought a neighbor's kid had left it there by accident. My wife told me exactly that. She said it with a smile. She even laughed a little. And I believed her. I believed her for 11 months. Until the day I found out that child wasn't drawing someone else's family. She was drawing hers. And my wife was in it. What you're about to hear is not a story about rage. I need you to understand that from the beginning. There was no confrontation in a parking lot. No broken dishes. No screaming. What happened was quieter than that. More deliberate. And in some ways, far more devastating precisely because of how controlled it was. This is a story about architecture. About how a person can construct 2 separate, fully functioning lives. 2 homes, 2 sets of routines, 2 versions of themselves, and maintain both of them for years. Not weeks. Not months. Years. It's a story about the assumptions we make about the people we sleep next to. The assumptions we need to make, because without them, ordinary life would be impossible. My name is Daniel. I'll use that name. I was married to Claire for 7 years. And for at least 3 of those 7 years, Claire was also someone else's partner. Someone else's family. Someone else's version of a wife. What I did when I found out, and how I found out, is the part one want you to stay for. Because it didn't end the way you're probably expecting. Stay until the end. There's a detail at the 20-minute mark that reframes everything that comes before it. Claire and I met at a work conference 11 years ago. She wasn't the loudest person in the room. She was the opposite of that. She listened more than she talked. She asked questions that made you feel like your answer actually mattered. I found that rare. I still do. We dated for 2 years. A careful 2 years. We didn't rush things. We talked about what we each wanted, honestly and early. She wanted stability. A quiet life. Something real, not performed. Those were her words. Something real, not performed. I have thought about that phrase many times since then. We got married in a small ceremony. Close family. A few friends. No excess. It suited both of us. We bought a house in the suburbs. Nothing remarkable, but ours. We had routines. Dinners on Fridays. Sunday morning walks. A vegetable garden that never quite worked but that we kept trying with anyway. She worked remotely in consulting. Her income was solid. Her hours were flexible. She traveled occasionally for clients. I traveled more, sometimes weeks at a time for my work. It was a rhythm we had settled into. Distance that felt manageable. Trust that felt earned. I want to be honest about something. Our marriage, in the portion of it I could see, was good. That is the part that took me the longest to make sense of. Not the betrayal. The fact that alongside it, in the space she let me occupy, things were genuinely good. The first sign wasn't dramatic. It never is, in my experience. It was a word. A single word in a sentence that didn't quite land right. We were talking about a weekend trip, somewhere in the mountains, nothing planned yet. And Claire said, almost in passing, like that place near the lake. I asked which lake. She paused. Not long. A second, maybe less. Then she said, oh, I don't know, I was just thinking of somewhere like that. And we moved on. But the pause stayed with me. Not in a way I could name at the time. Just a small irregularity, the kind your mind files away without telling you. Over the following months, there were others. She started keeping her laptop closed. She'd always left it open before. It had never been a thing between us. Suddenly it was closed. Password protected. Screen dimmed. She started taking calls in another room. Not every call. Just some of them. The ones she didn't announce. When I was away for work, She used to text me in the evenings. Small updates, nothing significant, just the texture of her day. Those texts became less frequent, then less detailed, then shorter. I told myself she was stressed. Her work had been more demanding. People change their habits. I change mine. None of it was evidence of anything. But the thing about small signs is that they accumulate. Even when you're not looking, they stack. And then, on a Tuesday in November, I came home a day early. My flight had been canceled due to weather. I'd rented a car and driven 4 hours instead. I hadn't called ahead. My phone had died somewhere on the highway and I hadn't stopped to charge it. I arrived home just after 10 at night. Claire's car wasn't in the driveway. That wasn't unusual. She sometimes worked late at a co-working space downtown. What was unusual was the light blinking on our landline. We'd kept the landline purely for emergencies. Neither of us used it. We hadn't checked the voicemail in months. I'm not sure what made me press play. I think on some level I already knew something was there. The message was from a woman named Emma. Her voice was warm, casual. The voice of someone calling a friend, not leaving a professional message. She said, "Claire, it's Emma. The girls wanted to know if you're still coming to the school thing on Thursday. Marcus said to remind you about the car seats. Apparently they're still in his car from last weekend." I played it again. And again. Marcus. Car seats. The girls. Last weekend. I stood in my kitchen for a very long time. The house around me was exactly as I'd left it 3 days before. Same furniture. Same smell. Same vegetable garden visible through the back window, barely surviving November. Everything was the same. And nothing was the same. I want to tell you exactly what I felt in that moment. Because I've been asked, and I think honesty here matters. I didn't feel rage. Not immediately. What I felt first was a strange, cold clarity. Like a fog lifting off something you've been looking at for a long time without knowing it. All the small things, the pauses, the closed laptop, the shortened texts, the word lake that didn't belong, they stopped being small. They became architecture. They became the visible surface of something that had been built below it. I thought about what I knew, and what I didn't know, and I made a decision. I would not act on what I felt. I would act on what I could verify. That distinction between feeling and knowing is the one that determined everything that followed. I put the phone back. I went to bed. I slept badly, but I slept. And in the morning, I began. I want to be careful here about what I'm describing. I didn't hire a private investigator. I didn't access anything I wasn't entitled to access. I didn't go through her personal accounts or hack into her devices. I didn't need to. The information I needed was already in places I had legitimate access to, or was simply visible, if you knew where to look and what pattern you were looking for. I started with what I knew. Emma had called on our landline. That number wasn't publicly listed. Claire had given it to her. That meant Emma wasn't an acquaintance. She was someone close enough to have that number. Marcus. A man named Marcus who had car seats. Car seats for the girls. Children old enough to use car seats but young enough to still need them. A school event on a Thursday. That was enough of a shape to start with. Claire's consulting work had always been legitimate. Her invoices were real. Her clients were real. I wasn't looking to disprove that. I wasn't trying to unravel her career. But her schedule had layers I had never examined. When I looked carefully, really carefully with fresh eyes, I could see them. The client visits that extended by a day. The team strategy sessions that landed on school holiday weeks. The long weekends that had always been explained but, now that I examined them, had been explained just slightly too smoothly. Within a week, I had a name. Marcus Webb. And a city. 3 hours from ours. Within 2 weeks, I had a neighborhood. Within 3, I had enough to understand the shape of what had been built there. I want to pause here and tell you what I was feeling during those 3 weeks. Because it wasn't what you might expect. I wasn't frantic. I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes. I wasn't lying awake in a state of panic. I was working, methodically, with a kind of cold focus I hadn't known I was capable of. Looking back, I think it was the only way I could function. Emotion would have made me impulsive. Impulsive meant mistakes. Mistakes meant I would never know the full truth. And I needed the full truth. Not a partial version. Not a version filtered through confrontation and denial. The full thing. What I found, in the end, was this. Marcus Webb had been in Claire's life for at least 4 years. Possibly longer. The trail got harder to read the further back I went. They had 2 daughters. Ages 5 and 7 at the time I was looking. Their names were ones I recognized. Family names. Names Claire had mentioned once or twice over the years, in other contexts, that I hadn't attached any significance to. They lived in a house in a suburb 3 hours from ours. Claire visited, on average, 8 to 10 days per month. She was not a weekend guest there. She was a resident. I closed the laptop. I went outside. I sat in my car in the driveway for 2 hours. I watched the sun move across the sky. And I understood, for the first time, the full scale of what had been built in the time I had been looking the other way. She hadn't had an affair. She had built a second life. Complete. Inhabited. With children who knew her as their mother. With a man who knew her as his partner. With a home that had her things in it. Alongside the home that had her things in it here. And both of those lives had been running. Fully, simultaneously, for years. I drove to that city on a Saturday morning. I want to be very clear about what I intended to do, and what I had already decided I would not do. I was not going to knock on a door. I was not going to approach anyone. I was not going to create a scene in front of children who had done nothing. I needed to see it. That was all. I needed to see it with my own eyes, so that the part of me that still wanted to believe I had assembled the wrong picture would have nothing left to hold on to. I parked on a street 2 blocks away. I waited. At 9:17 in the morning, the front door opened. Claire walked out. She was wearing a jacket I recognized. A dark green one she'd had for years. I had always liked that jacket. She was holding the hand of a small girl. The girl was saying something. I was too far away to hear it. But whatever it was, it made Claire laugh. That laugh. I had heard that laugh for 7 years. In our kitchen. On our couch. In the car on long drives. I heard it from 2 blocks away, through a closed car window, and I knew it completely. I took one photograph. Not for any purpose except documentation. Something to anchor me to the reality of what I had seen when doubt tried to creep back in later. Then I started the car. And I drove home. 4 hours. No music. No calls. No podcasts. Just the road. And the work of accepting something you already knew but hadn't yet let yourself fully hold. I waited until Sunday. I made coffee. Set the table. Waited for Claire to come downstairs. She came down in the same green jacket. She kissed me on the cheek. Poured herself a cup. And she sat down. I placed a single document in front of her. A printed page. A credit card statement. From an account I had found in the course of my research. One that existed in her name, that I had not known about, that showed a consistent pattern of charges in a city 3 hours away. Not everything. Not the full picture. Just enough. I didn't say anything. I watched. The color left her face in a way I have never seen happen to a person before or since. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. The recognition of someone who has been running a calculation for years and has just been told the calculation is over. She looked at the document. She looked at me. She asked how long I had known. I told her, 3 weeks. She asked what I was going to do. I told her exactly what I had already done. I had already contacted a lawyer 2 weeks prior. I had already begun the process of separating our joint financial accounts. I had already retained copies of every document I would need, not for punishment, but for clarity. Not for revenge. For clarity. Claire tried to explain. I want to give her that. She did try. She said it had started as something small and had grown beyond what she knew how to stop. She said she had loved both lives and hadn't known how to choose. She said she had told herself repeatedly that she would figure it out before anyone got hurt. I listened to all of it. Then I told her that I wasn't interested in an explanation. That no explanation would change the facts. That the only thing I wanted from that conversation was confirmation of one thing. How old were the children when it started? She told me. I nodded. I stood up. I took my coffee and went outside. We didn't have another real conversation after that. Our lawyers handled the rest. The divorce took 8 months. Clean, by divorce standards. We had no children together. The house was sold. The assets were divided. Claire returned to the other city. I learned, some months later, that Marcus Webb had filed his own papers shortly after our divorce was finalized. Apparently, he too had been kept in partial darkness about certain things. About the full extent of the parallel. We never spoke. I have no interest in speaking to him. We were just 2 men who had trusted someone completely. That's the only thing we had in common. It's enough of a thing. People ask me if I'm angry. I think about that question carefully every time it comes up. The honest answer is, anger is not what I primarily feel. What I feel is something harder to name. A kind of structural grief. Not for Claire exactly, but for the version of my life I had believed I was living. For 7 years I was building something. Every choice I made, financial, professional, personal, was made in the context of that marriage. Of that partnership. Of what I believed we were building together. And the ground under all of it had a different shape than I knew. That's the thing people don't account for when they talk about betrayal. They focus on the relationship. On what was lost between 2 people. But what you also lose is your own history. The version of the past 7 years that you had been carrying. The accurate one, the real one. That version doesn't exist anymore. You have to rebuild your understanding of your own life from scratch. Retroactively. With new information that changes the meaning of things you thought you understood. That is a particular kind of disorientation that I don't think I had words for until I was living it. I want to say one more thing about Claire. I don't think she was a monster. I don't think it serves me to believe that. What I think is that she was someone who made a choice. A large, consequential, ongoing choice, and then made smaller choices every day to maintain it. And at some point the whole structure became too large and too old to dismantle, so she just kept maintaining it. There is something almost understandable about that. Not forgivable, but understandable. What I cannot understand, and have stopped trying to understand, is how she sat across from me at that kitchen table, in that small ceremony, in all those Friday dinners, and held all of it at the same time. That is a kind of capacity I don't have. I don't know whether that's a flaw in her, or something about how the human mind works under pressure, or both. I just know it wasn't something I recognized in the person I thought I knew. The next time you sit across from someone at dinner, someone you love, someone you trust, someone whose laugh you know better than your own, ask yourself one quiet, uncomfortable question. How much of their life do you actually see? Not the version they show you. Not the version you've built a picture of over years. The version that exists when you're not in the room. Because some people are very, very careful about which doors they leave open for you. And the ones they keep closed can be large enough to live inside.